A small German Shepherd puppy came running down a quiet Kentucky road, muddy, exhausted, and crying as if someone had disappeared from her world. She climbed onto Navy SEAL Adam Parker's porch, pressed both paws against his arm, and refused to stop calling out. Adam checked her carefully. She wasn't badly hurt. So who was she crying for? Why did she keep running toward the road, then turning back to make sure he followed? And when Adam finally went with her, why was an old Buick sitting alone ahead, door partly open, phone and purse still inside, but no driver anywhere in sight? Who was 72-year-old Helen Cooper, and why had she walked away from her car? This is a fictional story created for storytelling purposes. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Late April had settled softly over Berea, Kentucky, bringing cool air, damp earth, and a ceiling of pale gray clouds that seemed undecided about rain. The hills beyond town were already green, but the old Parker house still carried the tired look of winter. Its white paint had begun to peel around the porch railings. One gutter sagged slightly over the side yard, and cardboard boxes now stood in uneven rows inside the front room, waiting to be sorted, labeled, kept, or thrown away. Adam Parker had discovered that the last category was much harder than the others. At 41, Adam looked like the sort of man strangers instinctively moved aside for in narrow hallways. He stood 6'2", broad through the shoulders, lean through the waist, with short, dark brown hair clipped close at the sides and the first threads of gray beginning above his temples. A neatly trimmed beard sharpened an already angular jaw, and a faint, pale line beneath his chin marked an old training accident he rarely remembered, unless someone asked about it. He was a Navy SEAL. Still active, though currently on leave, and years of military life had trained him to notice what most people ignored. Doors left unlocked, tire tracks where there should be none, a person looking twice at an exit, a sound that did not belong. He was courteous with strangers, patient with frightened people, and almost impossible to surprise. His younger sister had once told him that this made him useful in an emergency and exhausting everywhere else. Adam was sitting on the front porch now, in faded jeans, brown work boots, and a charcoal long-sleeved shirt, with the sleeves pushed to his forearms. 3 open boxes surrounded his chair. One held tax records from more than a decade ago. Another contained recipe cards in their mother's careful handwriting. The third held what Emily had called things no reasonable human being needs to preserve, which included 2 cracked picture frames, an expired warranty for a toaster, 4 church bulletins, and a key that neither of them could identify. Adam still had not thrown the key away. The screen door creaked behind him. Emily Parker stepped onto the porch, carrying a roll of packing tape and wearing the expression of a woman who had already lost an argument she had not technically started yet. At 38, Emily was several inches shorter than her brother, with a slim, energetic build, thick chestnut brown hair cut just above her shoulders, hazel eyes, and a face that showed every opinion before she bothered putting it into words. Where Adam became quieter when irritated, Emily became funnier. He worked as an elementary school librarian in Lexington, and had spent years learning how to negotiate with children who believed returning a book 3 months late was an act of political resistance. Compared with them, her brother was only moderately difficult. "Tell me," she said, leaning against the porch post, "that you have not spent 20 minutes deciding whether Mom's 2011 dental receipt has historical value." Adam looked down at the paper in his hand. 14 minutes. That is not the defense you think it is. It shows progress. Emily stared at him. Adam placed the receipt into the discard box. She lifted both eyebrows. "I'm proud of you. By sunset, we may even reach the electric bills." The corner of Adam's mouth moved, not quite a smile. Their mother had been gone for 11 months, and the house was finally being prepared for sale. Emily wanted the process finished. Adam wanted it finished too, at least in theory. In practice, he kept slowing down. He told himself it was because mistakes made during sorting were permanent. Once something went into a dumpster, there was no recovery plan. Emily believed there was another reason. "You know," she said, more quietly now, "we don't have to understand what every object meant to her." Adam folded one of the church bulletins along its existing crease. "I know." "No, you know the sentence. That isn't the same thing." He glanced up. Emily did not push further. She had learned that Adam could withstand interrogation better than concern. Pressure made him organize his defenses. Silence sometimes slipped past them. She went back inside. Adam remained on the porch. The truth was irritating precisely because it was simple. He had spent most of his adult life in environments where overlooked details could matter. A wrong assumption could become a bad decision. A bad decision could become something no apology could reverse. Once a person lived long enough under that reality, caution stopped feeling like a habit. It began to feel like morality. Check everything. Miss nothing. Leave no unanswered question behind. Adam picked up the unidentified key again. That was when he heard the cry. His head lifted immediately. It came from somewhere beyond the front yard. High, thin, strained, not a child, not a bird. A second cry followed, closer this time, raw enough to make him stand. Adam stepped to the edge of the porch. Movement appeared beyond the mailbox. A small dog came running around the bend in the road. For half a second, Adam thought it might be a fox because of the awkward length of its legs and the way it seemed almost too light for its own body. Then it reached the driveway, and the black and tan markings became unmistakable. German Shepherd, a puppy, very young. The animal ran across the grass directly toward him. "Easy," Adam said. The puppy had no interest in easy. It scrambled up the porch steps, slipped on the second one, recovered, and launched itself toward his legs. Adam crouched instinctively. The puppy planted both front paws against his forearm and looked up into his face. Then it cried again. Up close, Adam could see that she was perhaps 11 weeks old, female, underweight without being severely starved, with dusty black and tan fur and oversized paws she had not yet grown into. Her right ear stood upright with determined confidence. Her left had only made it halfway and folded slightly at the tip, giving her a permanently uneven expression. Fine dirt coated her belly and legs. Her small pink tongue flashed between breaths. But it was her eyes that held Adam, dark brown, wide, fixed on him with an intensity that felt disproportionate to such a small animal. She made the sound again. It was not barking, not quite whining either. The noise broke in the middle, a sharp, distressed vocalization that sounded unnervingly close to sobbing. Adam placed one hand against her chest. Rapid heartbeat. He checked her legs, paws, ribs, abdomen. No obvious fracture, no blood, no swelling that suggested an immediate injury. He ran his fingers carefully along her neck and found a simple red nylon collar. "Okay," he murmured. "What happened to you?" The puppy squirmed away before he finished. She ran down the steps. Adam watched her reach the edge of the yard. Then she stopped, turned around, cried. He frowned. The puppy ran several yards toward the road, stopped again, looked back at him and made the same desperate sound. Adam stayed where he was. She came racing back. This time she put both paws against his knee and vocalized so loudly that Emily appeared behind the screen door. "What on earth?" Adam raised one hand. Emily stepped outside and stared at the puppy. "Oh." The little German Shepherd barely looked at her. Her attention remained fixed on Adam. Emily crouched a few feet away. "Where did she come from?" "Road." "Is she hurt?" "Not that I can find." The puppy darted away again. Road, turn, cry. Emily watched the pattern. "So either she wants you to follow her," she said, "or you've somehow been adopted by the most demanding puppy in Kentucky." Adam gave her a look. "I'm trying to lighten the atmosphere." The puppy came back again, more frantic now. Adam caught the collar gently and turned the small metal tag. One side read, "Sadie." The reverse carried a phone number. Adam took out his phone and called. The line rang, once, twice, 5 times. No answer. He tried again. Nothing. Sadie twisted against his hand, then pulled toward the road. Adam looked at Emily. Emily looked at Sadie. Neither said anything for several seconds. Adam felt an old, familiar shift inside himself. It was the moment a strange situation stopped being random and became a problem with pieces. A puppy had come from somewhere. She had a collar. She had an owner. The owner was not answering. The puppy was not injured, and yet she was frightened enough to run alone down a rural road and repeatedly return for a stranger. People liked to imagine that animals possessed some mysterious wisdom humans had lost. Adam had never believed that. Dogs could panic. Dogs could misread danger. Dogs could chase squirrels directly into traffic and then look offended by the consequences. Intelligence did not make an animal infallible, but fear usually had an object. Sadie's fear was somewhere down that road. Adam stood. Emily sighed. "You're going. I'm checking where she came from. That sentence has started several terrible family stories. I'll be back." Emily folded her arms. "You say that like a man going to the mailbox. You have the expression you use when something has become a mission." Adam looked at her. "That's not an expression. It absolutely is." Sadie cried again. Adam stepped off the porch. The puppy immediately ran ahead. This time, when she looked back, he was following. The road curved gently between low fields and stands of maple and oak, still damp from rain the night before. Sadie moved fast for perhaps 20 yards, then slowed as though making certain Adam remained behind her. Every time the distance widened, she stopped and waited. Adam noticed details automatically. Mud on her hind legs, but little on her shoulders. No leash attached. No torn collar. No blood on the pavement. He continued. The farther they walked, the quieter the houses became. Less than half a mile from the Parker property, Sadie suddenly left the road and hurried toward a narrow gravel pull-off, bordered by tall grass. Adam saw the car before he saw anything else. An older Buick sedan sat crooked near the edge of the gravel, its front wheels turned sharply toward the ditch, as though the driver had pulled over without caring much about alignment. Sadie ran to it. The rear passenger door was open several inches, enough for a puppy to squeeze through. Adam slowed. Something in him became very still. "Hello?" he called. No answer. He approached the driver's side. The door was closed. The keys were not visible. Through the window he could see a woman's purse lying on the passenger seat, a cell phone beside it. Adam walked around the vehicle. No person, no movement in the ditch. No one in the back seat. Sadie stood beside the open rear door, whining. Adam tried the passenger handle, unlocked. He opened it carefully and looked inside. A light floral scent lingered in the upholstery. A pair of reading glasses rested near the center console. The purse was ordinary brown leather, worn smooth along the straps. Adam did not rummage blindly. He opened only enough to find identification. The driver's license showed a 72-year-old woman named Helen Cooper. The photograph was small and clinical, but Adam could make out silver-gray hair cut neatly around a narrow, lined face, and pale blue eyes that looked directly at the camera without smiling. Helen Cooper, Berea address. Adam looked toward the empty road. Beside the purse lay a folded Sunday newspaper. The crossword page faced upward. Adam picked it up by one corner. Most of the puzzle had been completed in pencil. One answer near the center had been written, erased, written again, then scrubbed so aggressively that the paper had almost torn through. Adam stared at the damaged square longer than he meant to. Some mistakes people corrected lightly. Others they tried so hard to erase that they damaged the things surrounding them. Sadie made a low sound. Adam turned. Behind the Buick, partly hidden by weeds, an old service road disappeared between the trees and climbed toward the Kentucky hills. He looked at the empty car, the phone, the purse, the open rear door, then at the little German shepherd standing beside him. Sadie lifted her face toward that narrow road. her uneven ears pulled back, and she began to cry again. The afternoon had turned cooler over the hills outside Berea, Kentucky, and the pale April sky had lowered into a flat sheet of gray above the narrow service road. The old Buick sat at an awkward angle beside the gravel, as if someone had stopped with no intention of parking properly. Adam Parker stood several feet from the open rear door, Helen Cooper's driver's license still in his hand, while Sadie pressed against his boot and stared toward the trees. The 11-week-old German shepherd had stopped crying for the moment, but every few seconds her body tightened as though another sound was building somewhere inside her. Adam looked along the service road, disappearing between the hills. His instinct told him to move. His experience told him not to. Those two things were often mistaken for the same voice, but Adam had spent enough years around real emergencies to know the difference. A frightened puppy was not a tracking dog. An empty vehicle did not automatically mean violence. And charging alone into unfamiliar woods because something felt wrong was not courage. Sometimes it was simply impatience dressed in better clothing. He took out his phone and called the county sheriff's office. While waiting, Adam kept Sadie near the Buick, rather than allowing her to run toward the service road again. She protested immediately. Her paws scraped the gravel as she pulled against his hand. When Adam tried lifting her, she twisted with surprising strength for such a small body, legs kicking until he set her down. "Fine," he muttered. Message received. Sadie sneezed dirt onto his jeans. Under different circumstances, Adam might have laughed. Instead, he looked once more at the empty driver's seat. A woman of 72 had left her purse, phone, reading glasses, and dog behind. Whatever explanation existed, it was unlikely to be ordinary. A sheriff's cruiser arrived about 20 minutes later, tires crunching over the gravel. The woman who stepped out was Deputy Rachel Moore, 39, compact and athletic at perhaps 5'6", with medium brown skin, dark hair pulled into a practical low bun, and sharp, gray-brown eyes that seemed to settle on details before people. She wore the tan and brown uniform of the county sheriff's department, without unnecessary decoration, and a small scar crossed the outside of her left eyebrow. Rachel had worked patrol for more than 14 years, long enough to distrust dramatic conclusions made in the first 5 minutes. Her father had spent 3 decades as a rural firefighter, and she had grown up hearing the same lesson in different forms. The first story people tell themselves about an emergency is often the wrong one. Adam introduced himself and gave her the short version. Rachel listened without interrupting. "You touched anything inside?" "Passenger door handle, purse enough to identify the owner, newspaper." Rachel nodded once. "That's useful." It was not praise. Adam appreciated that. She photographed the vehicle before approaching it, then worked slowly around the Buick, checking the ground, the ditch, the tires, the doors, and the surrounding vegetation. Adam stayed back with Sadie. He noticed Rachel never rushed to fill silence. She let facts accumulate before giving them a shape. "No broken glass," she said eventually. "No obvious blood. No damage suggesting impact." She crouched near the driver's side. Adam followed her gaze. Several impressions showed in the damp ground beside the car, small boot prints. Rachel pointed without touching. "One person getting out here." The prints crossed the gravel and continued toward the old service road. Adam looked at the path. "No second set?" "Not close enough to the car that I can see." "Could have been picked up farther ahead." Rachel glanced at him. "Could have been abducted by a marching band, too. We work with what's here first." Adam almost smiled. He liked her immediately. That did not mean he liked what she was saying. Rachel examined the prints again. "Stride looks steady. No obvious dragging. No signs of someone being forced. So she walked. That's what the ground says." The sentence bothered Adam more than he expected. If Helen had been pulled from the Buick, there would be a clear enemy to search for. If she had walked away willingly, the problem became less visible. Rachel called in Helen's license information and requested contact attempts at the address listed on the identification. Then she looked toward the trees. How far did the dog come from? Found her at my mother's place, less than half a mile east. And you're sure she came from this car? Rear door's open enough for her. She led me here. Rachel looked at Sadie. Sadie looked back, then promptly became distracted by a dead leaf rolling across the gravel. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Adam said, "She has limitations." Good. I distrust prodigies. They followed the service road on foot, while another deputy was requested to remain with the vehicle. Adam kept Sadie behind because the puppy was already tired, and because Rachel made it clear that turning a frightened 11-week-old dog loose in unfamiliar woodland would create a second search problem. The boot prints remained visible in patches of soft soil. Helen's path was not straight. At one point the track stopped near a fence, then resumed beyond it where the ground rose toward a wooded slope. About 200 yards from the Buick, Adam spotted something pale blue caught on rusty wire. Hold! Rachel stopped. A lightweight scarf hung from the fence, twisted tightly around one barb. Rachel photographed it before removing it carefully. The fabric smelled faintly of perfume. Sadie, who had been whining in Adam's arms again, went suddenly still when he lowered her close enough to sniff. Her nose pressed toward the scarf. Then she cried. Not loudly this time, just one small, broken sound. Adam felt something tighten behind his ribs. Humans had a habit of assigning meaning to animals because silence made us uncomfortable. A dog looked sad, so we imagined grief. A horse resisted a gate, so we imagined memory. Sometimes we were right. Sometimes we simply poured our own emotions into creatures that could not correct us. Adam knew that. Yet watching Sadie smell the scarf made skepticism feel strangely inadequate. They continued another 100 yards before Rachel found the envelope. It lay beside a patch of wet leaves, torn across one corner and darkened by mud. Rachel crouched. Bank logo. She photographed it, then used gloved fingers to lift the paper. Inside was a folded transfer receipt. Adam could not read the entire document from where he stood, but the amount near the bottom was visible, large enough that he looked twice. Rachel noticed. Recent, she said. The transfer had been made only days earlier. The recipient information meant little to either of them at first glance, but the number itself changed the atmosphere. Adam looked toward the hill. Maybe someone pressured her? Maybe. Financial exploitation? Possible. Then we keep going. Rachel folded the document into an evidence sleeve. We go as far as we safely can before dark. Adam's jaw tightened. She's 72. I noticed. If she's injured, and if we cross onto private land after sunset, lose the trail, and one of us breaks an ankle, we help exactly nobody. Adam looked away. He hated the answer because it was reasonable. Reasonable answers were often the hardest ones to argue with. They pushed farther until the old service road split into two faint tracks. One climbed into timber. The other descended toward land marked with a weathered "No Trespassing" sign. The boot impressions had become too faint to follow confidently. Rachel stopped. We're done here for tonight. Adam stared at the hill. No. Rachel's expression did not change. That wasn't a question. There's still daylight. Not enough to search unfamiliar property without a team, landowner information, or reliable tracking. Adam's voice flattened. So we wait. We organize. To someone missing out there, those are the same thing. Rachel studied him for a moment. Then she said quietly, No, they aren't. And people who confuse urgency with usefulness tend to make scenes worse. That landed harder than Adam expected. Before he could answer, a car door slammed behind them near the road. Sadie exploded. The puppy twisted out of Adam's loose grip, scrambled across the gravel, and vanished beneath Rachel's cruiser. Adam closed his eyes briefly. Rachel looked under the vehicle. Two brown eyes stared back from behind the front tire. So much for our woodland guide. Adam crouched. Sadie! No response. Rachel crouched beside him. Want me to call a negotiator? I have handled worse. Sadie crawled farther under the cruiser. Rachel's mouth twitched. Adam extended his hand without reaching. "Come on." Sadie refused. He waited. Eventually, the puppy crept forward enough for Adam to catch the collar gently. When he brought her out, she pressed against his legs, trembling. Emily's car pulled up shortly after. She climbed out wearing jeans, hiking shoes, and a dark green jacket, her chestnut hair pushed behind one ear by the wind. One look at Adam's expression told her enough. "They're stopping. For now." Emily glanced toward the hills. "And you hate that. There's a woman missing." "There is. She could be up there." "She could." Adam looked at her sharply. "You agreeing with me?" "No. I'm reminding you that fear doesn't become more useful just because you organize it." He said nothing. Emily softened. "You do this every time something matters. You tighten your grip until the thing has no room left to move." "I'm trying to help. I know." That was the problem with family. Strangers criticized behavior. Family knew the excuse beneath it. Rachel returned from the cruiser. "We reached Helen Cooper's daughter." Adam turned. "She's coming here." Less than 40 minutes later, headlights appeared on the road. A silver SUV pulled beside the Buick. The woman who stepped out was 47-year-old Nancy Cooper, Helen's only daughter. Nancy was medium height with a sturdy, practical build, light brown hair cut into a chin-length bob, streaked naturally with gray, and tired green eyes that looked as though sleep had recently become optional. She wore navy slacks, a cream blouse beneath a camel-colored cardigan, and low black shoes unsuitable for gravel. Nancy worked as an office administrator for a regional medical clinic, a job that had trained her to solve small crises quickly and keep emotion out of public spaces. But whatever professional composure she possessed disappeared when she saw the Buick. Then she saw Sadie. Oh God, Sadie recognized her. The puppy pulled toward Nancy but stopped halfway, uncertain, whining. Nancy covered her mouth. "She never leaves that dog." Rachel approached gently. "Ms. Cooper, when did you last speak with your mother?" Nancy's eyes remained on Sadie. 3 days ago." "Anything unusual?" Nancy hesitated. Adam watched the hesitation rather than her face. There it was. The detail people wished they could take back before they had even said it. Rachel showed her the bank transfer receipt. Nancy's skin seemed to drain of color. "Where did you get that?" "Near the service road." Nancy closed her eyes. For several seconds she said nothing. When she opened them again, shame had entered her expression alongside fear. "She called me 3 days ago," Nancy said. "She asked me something strange." Rachel waited. Nancy swallowed. "She asked whether a person could make one mistake so bad that they wouldn't want their family to look at them anymore." Adam looked past her toward the darkening hills. The empty Buick no longer felt like the center of the mystery. Neither did the abandoned phone. Helen Cooper had stepped away from the road under her own power, and for the first time Adam wondered whether they were searching for a woman who had become lost in the woods at all. Perhaps they were searching for someone trying to disappear from the people who loved her. By early evening, the light over the hills outside Berea had thinned to a cold gray, and the search area around Helen Cooper's Buick had taken on the uneasy stillness that comes when people know more than they did an hour ago, but still not enough to act with certainty. Deputy Rachel Moore had moved everyone back toward the vehicles while she made calls and organized what would happen next. Adam Parker stood beside the Buick with his arms folded across his chest, watching Nancy Cooper stare at the bank receipt as though it had accused her of something personally. Sadie remained close to Adam's boots, exhausted now, her small black and tan body curled on the gravel with her uneven ears twitching whenever someone raised a voice. Emily stood several yards away near her car, giving Nancy the kind of privacy that did not require leaving. No one hurried the woman. Sometimes the cruelest thing about difficult truth was that once it was invited into a conversation, everyone expected it to arrive quickly. Nancy finally lowered the paper. "It started last week." Her voice was controlled, but Adam noticed the way she kept rubbing her thumb against the side of her index finger. "Mom got a call in the afternoon. A man said he was an attorney. Rachel stopped writing long enough to look directly at her. Did she give you a name? She did. I wrote it down somewhere, but it was fake. Everything about him was fake. Nancy breathed in slowly. He told her my son had been arrested after an accident. Said there had been injuries. Said they needed money for bail and legal fees before anyone could speak to him. Her son was Ryan Cooper, 23, Helen's only grandson. A tall, lanky young man with sandy brown hair, a narrow face, and the mild, absent-minded temperament of someone who could lose his wallet twice in 1 week, but call his grandmother every Sunday without fail. Ryan worked as an apprentice electrician in Louisville and had inherited Helen's habit of laughing hardest at jokes he told badly. Nancy's expression tightened when she spoke his name. The caller knew enough. Ryan's age, the city he lives in, that he drives. He even told Mom Ryan was embarrassed and didn't want me called yet. Rachel asked, "Did your mother hear your son's voice?" A few seconds. Someone crying, saying, "Grandma, I messed up, that was all." Adam's eyes shifted toward the service road. He had heard enough recordings altered by technology to know how little was needed to make fear do the rest. Nancy continued. Then the lawyer came back on and told her not to waste time because Ryan could be transferred somewhere else. Mom panicked. "And she transferred the money?" Rachel asked. Nancy nodded. 2 transfers, one from savings, one from a certificate she cashed early. She looked down at the receipt in Rachel's evidence sleeve. A little over $68,000. Emily inhaled softly. Adam said nothing. For Helen Cooper, the loss was not merely a number. Nancy explained that the money represented almost 12 years of careful saving after her husband died. Helen had been a school secretary for more than 3 decades, never earning what anyone would call a large salary. She clipped coupons even when she did not need to, repaired hems instead of replacing clothes, and once drove across town because canned tomatoes were 40 cents cheaper at another grocery store. Her husband, Thomas Cooper, had died 7 years earlier at 74 after a long heart condition. Nancy described him as a broad, soft-spoken man with silver hair, heavy eyebrows, and hands permanently marked by decades of carpentry work. Thomas had possessed a dry humor and an unusual gift for allowing Helen to be angry without trying to correct her. After his death, Helen had become more determined to manage everything herself. Not because she distrusted Nancy, but because independence had become one of the last pieces of marriage she still felt she could protect. The savings account was proof that she remained capable. It was the roof she expected to repair, the medical bills she might one day face, the freedom not to become financially dependent on her daughter. Losing the money had struck somewhere deeper than economics. Nancy had discovered the truth only because Ryan called his grandmother that evening. "He was joking about something," Nancy said. "I don't even remember what. Mom asked him if he was okay. He said yes. She asked if he was sure. Then she hung up." Nancy's voice cracked for the first time. "She called me 10 minutes later." Adam could picture the moment without having been there. An older woman standing in her own kitchen, perhaps beside a table she had owned for 20 years, suddenly realizing that nothing physically around her had changed, while the future she believed she understood had shifted beneath her feet. People often imagined shame as something dramatic, a confession, lowered eyes, tears. More often, Adam thought, shame behaved like architecture. It quietly made certain doors feel impossible to walk through. "What did you do?" Rachel asked. Nancy gave a humorless laugh. "Exactly what I thought a good daughter should do." The argument had happened at Helen's house the following morning. Nancy drove over before work, carrying printed fraud information, the bank's phone number, and a notebook. Helen had already called the bank, but the transactions had moved beyond the first stage of reversal. She sat at her kitchen table wearing a pale yellow cardigan, her silver-gray hair neatly brushed, despite having slept almost nothing. Helen was 72, 5'4", slender without seeming fragile, with pale skin, fine lines around light blue eyes, and a mouth that became very straight whenever she believed pity was approaching. She had spent 34 years behind the front desk of an elementary school, where she had been known for remembering children's birthdays, correcting principals' grammar, and refusing to tolerate adults who talked down to children. Age had softened her face, but not that instinct. Nancy came in frightened and began making a list. "I told her we needed to freeze everything," Nancy said. "Change account numbers, change her phone number, check her credit. I told her I wanted online access to her accounts so I could watch for anything unusual. I said she shouldn't answer numbers she didn't recognize. I even told her maybe I should hold on to her checkbook for a while." Emily's eyes moved toward Adam. Nancy saw it. "I know how that sounds," Adam answered before Emily could. "It sounds practical." Emily turned her head toward him immediately. Nancy looked relieved to have an ally. "That's what I thought." Rachel's expression remained neutral. "What did Helen think?" Nancy swallowed. "She asked when I had decided she was incompetent." Adam frowned. "That's not what you said." "No, but that's what she heard." The conversation became worse from there. Nancy told Helen the scam might happen again. Helen replied that one mistake did not erase 72 years of judgment. Nancy said she was only trying to keep her safe. Helen asked whether safe meant asking permission before buying groceries. Nancy told her not to be ridiculous. Helen stood from the table and told her daughter to stop speaking to her like a patient. "I got angry," Nancy admitted. "I told her she had just lost more money in 20 minutes than I make in a year." No one said anything. Nancy closed her eyes. "I wish I hadn't said it." The line had ended the argument. Helen had not shouted. That, Nancy said, was worse. She simply removed her glasses, folded them on the table, and asked Nancy to leave. Adam looked at the Buick. He understood Nancy's reasoning almost completely. That was what bothered Emily. "If someone demonstrates they're vulnerable to something like that," Adam said, "you reduce the exposure, at least temporarily." Emily folded her arms. "Of course you think that." Adam turned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you hear a story about someone making one terrible mistake, and your first instinct is to redesign her life. She lost $68,000. I heard the number. So what would you do?" Emily thought for a moment. "Ask her what she wants help with. And if she says nothing, then keep asking without taking over. That's not protection." "No," Emily said. "It's respect." Adam felt irritation rise, partly because the distinction seemed dangerously sentimental. "Respect doesn't recover money." Emily stepped closer. "And control doesn't erase humiliation." Nancy looked between them but did not interrupt. Emily's voice softened. "Adam, if you made one catastrophic mistake tomorrow, would you want me helping you recover from it? Or deciding you were no longer allowed to make decisions because I couldn't trust you?" "That's different." "Why?" He had no immediate answer, which annoyed him more than the question itself. Emily nodded once. "That's what I thought." Adam looked away. He had spent much of his adult life accepting responsibility for outcomes. In his world, failing to control a preventable risk was not philosophical. It could become a name someone carried for the rest of his life. Somewhere along the way, he had begun treating control as a synonym for care. Responsibility sounded noble, control sounded ugly. Calling it responsibility made the same instinct easier to live with. Nancy rubbed both palms over her face. "The morning after our argument, Mom called me. She sounded calmer. Too calm, maybe. She said she needed a few days." "Did she say where she was going?" Rachel asked. "No. I told her not to drive around upset. She told me she was not confused, senile, drunk, or lost." Nancy gave a tired half-smile. "Those were her exact words." "And Sadie?" "Mom took her. She bought Sadie about a month ago after insisting for 2 years that she never wanted another dog because puppies were tiny criminals with excellent public relations." Emily almost smiled. Nancy did too, briefly. "Then she met Sadie and lasted about 6 minutes. Adam looked down at the puppy asleep against his boot. Tiny criminal seemed plausible. Rachel asked Nancy to think carefully about anything Helen might have mentioned. Relatives, hotels, old friends, churches, parks, places connected to Thomas. Nancy shook her head at first. Then something changed. She stopped. Her eyes narrowed as though listening to a voice from several days earlier. "What?" Rachel asked. "The last thing she said." Nancy stared past the Buick. "She said, 'Your father used to take me somewhere whenever I got too scared to go home.'" Adam straightened. Nancy's breathing quickened. "Oh my God! You know where?" Rachel asked. Nancy nodded slowly. "Blue Moon Drive-In." Emily frowned. "The old movie theater. It closed years ago, almost 30, I think. My parents went there when they were dating. Dad used to joke that whenever Mom got furious with the world, he'd drive her there because nobody could stay angry through 2 terrible movies and a bucket of stale popcorn." Her voice changed as memory overtook fear. Even after it closed, they sometimes drove out there and sat in the car. Dad said it was their place to be confused without anybody watching. Rachel was already pulling up the county map on her phone. "Where is it?" "West of town, off an old county road." Rachel entered the name, waited, then turned the screen toward them. A faded map marker appeared among wooded hills. 12 miles, she said. For the first time since Sadie had run onto the Parker porch, the uncertainty narrowed into something resembling direction. Adam looked toward the dark hills, then at the little dog sleeping beside him. Helen Cooper had finally left them one clue that did not require guessing: Blue Moon Drive-In. And now they knew where to look next. Morning came cool and colorless over the country roads west of Berea, the clouds hanging low enough to soften the ridge lines and leave the abandoned fields silver with dew. By the time Adam Parker, Nancy Cooper, and Deputy Rachel Moore turned onto the cracked county road leading toward Blue Moon Drive-In, Sadie was asleep in a travel crate on the back seat of Nancy's SUV. After the previous day, Rachel had been firm about one thing: an 11-week-old puppy was not going to wander through an abandoned property simply because everyone had become emotionally attached to the idea that she understood the mystery better than they did. Nancy had agreed immediately. Adam had agreed after Sadie attempted to eat the corner of the map Rachel had printed. Blue Moon Drive-In appeared gradually through the trees. First came the rusted metal sign, its blue paint bleached nearly white by decades of Kentucky summers. Then, the enormous movie screen rose beyond the weeds, a pale rectangle against the gray sky, stained by weather and split along one corner. Rows that had once held hundreds of cars were now broken by waist-high grass, saplings, and sections of cracked pavement lifted by roots. The ticket booth still stood near the entrance, with 2 dirty glass windows, but one side had collapsed inward. Nothing about the place felt dangerous. That almost made it sadder. It looked less like something abandoned than something the world had simply stopped needing. Nancy sat motionless for several seconds after Rachel parked. "My father loved this place," she said. Adam glanced toward her. Nancy's tired green eyes remained on the screen. "He hated most of the movies." "Then why come?" "He said Mom enjoyed complaining about them." Adam almost smiled. Nancy did. Apparently, criticizing terrible acting was romantic in 1978. The small laugh disappeared quickly, but Adam noticed something important in it. Until that morning, Thomas Cooper had existed in the investigation mostly as a dead husband whose memory might explain Helen's behavior. Now Adam could imagine him more clearly. A broad-handed carpenter sitting beside a younger Helen in some long-gone sedan, pretending to watch a movie while she explained everything wrong with it. Human beings became easier to understand when they stopped being categories: widow, daughter, missing person, and became ridiculous in ordinary ways. Rachel checked the property records before allowing them farther in. The county had taken possession after unpaid taxes several years earlier, and she had received permission to enter. "Stay where I can see you," she said. The structures haven't been maintained. Adam nodded. You're saying that specifically to me. I'm learning. They crossed the old parking field toward the projection building, a long, low structure behind the vehicle rows. Nancy walked faster as they approached. Adam noticed it and deliberately did not tell her to slow down. That restraint felt embarrassingly difficult. The door to the projection building was already open. Rachel entered first. Dust covered most of the floor, but not all of it. A narrow path had been disturbed between the doorway and a small office at the rear. Inside, daylight came through a cracked window and fell across a folding table. Nancy stopped in the doorway. She was here. There was no dramatic evidence, no message written on a wall, no sign of violence. Instead, the room contained the painfully ordinary remains of one night spent away from home. A folded wool blanket lay on the floor beside an old padded chair. A half-empty bottle of water stood near it. On the table sat a prescription bottle. Nancy picked it up after Rachel photographed it. Blood pressure medication. The label carried Helen Cooper's name. Beside the bottle were 2 crackers wrapped in a paper napkin and a small plastic bag containing dry puppy food. Adam looked toward Nancy. She brought enough for Sadie. Nancy's mouth tightened. That mattered. Helen had not simply driven until she became confused. She had packed food for the dog, medication for herself, water, and a blanket. Whatever judgment had brought her there, it had not been complete disorientation. She planned this, Nancy said. Rachel nodded. At least part of it. Nancy sat in the old office chair. Dust rose around the legs. She knew exactly where she was going. For the first time since Helen disappeared, Nancy's fear had to share space with another emotion. Hurt. Adam understood why. It was one thing to imagine your mother confused and lost. It was another to discover she had deliberately chosen somewhere else over you. People like to say they only wanted their missing loved ones safe. Adam suspected that was true until safety arrived carrying evidence of choice. Rachel examined the room. Nothing says she intended to stay long. Adam noticed the second object before Nancy did. A wooden case rested beneath the table. He crouched and pulled it into the light. The case was walnut, about 18 inches wide, with brass hinges polished by years of handling. 6 shallow compartments lined the interior, each shaped to hold a wristwatch. All 6 were empty. Nancy inhaled sharply. Dad's watches. Adam looked up. All of them? 6. She touched one of the empty compartments. Mom kept them in her bedroom dresser. She never wore them. She said winding one made her feel like she was pretending he was coming back. Rachel photographed the case. Were they valuable? Nancy hesitated. Some, maybe. One was his father's. There was an old Hamilton, a Longines, one gold watch from their 25th anniversary. I don't know what collectors pay. Adam looked at the empty slots. Helen had not brought random jewelry. She had selected objects tied directly to Thomas. A woman who had spent 12 years building financial independence had lost most of it in minutes. Then, rather than accept her daughter's help, she had removed perhaps the most valuable objects she owned. The logic was beginning to form. Not good logic, but human logic. Rachel found the business card beneath the case. Dawson Antiques and Estate Jewelry, Lexington. Nancy leaned closer. On the back, written in Helen's neat pencil, were 4 words. Tuesday, 2:30. Ask Frank. Rachel checked her phone. That's today. Adam glanced at the time. They had several hours. Nancy stared at the card as though it were another betrayal. She's selling them. Looks possible, Rachel said. She would never sell Dad's watches. Adam looked at the empty case. She might if she thought it meant fixing the money. Nancy stood abruptly. Then we have to go now. Rachel held up one hand. I'm calling the store first. We confirm the address and whether anyone there knows her. What if she gets there before us? We still confirm. Nancy's frustration appeared instantly, but this time Adam understood Rachel before Rachel needed to explain herself. They had followed one emotional conclusion after another for 2 days. A little verification would not hurt them. While Rachel stepped outside to make the call, Adam's phone vibrated. "Emily," he answered. "You found anything?" she asked. "Evidence Helen stayed here. She's gone now." "I figured." Adam heard boxes moving in the background. "You're still at the house?" "Yes, because unlike my brother, I apparently understand the concept of a closing date." "What did you find?" Silence. That made Adam pay attention. Emily said, "Something about Mom." Adam moved toward the cracked window. "What?" "I found a folder behind the old desk drawer. Letters, bank notices too." His shoulders tightened. "What kind of notices?" "There was a loan." Adam frowned. "Mom didn't have loans. She did in 2003. No." "Adam." He said nothing. Emily continued. Their mother, Evelyn Parker, who had died the previous year at 73, had been a tall, narrow-shouldered woman with dark hair that turned almost completely white by 60, warm brown eyes and a quiet voice people frequently mistook for softness. She had worked part-time as a church bookkeeper after raising Adam and Emily, and she had built an almost mythic reputation in her children's minds for competence. Evelyn never forgot appointments, never bounced a check, never left an insurance form unfinished. When Adam was 17 and their father permanently left the family after years of unreliable absences, Evelyn had kept the household running without dramatizing what it cost her. Adam had spent his life remembering her as the person who always knew what to do. Emily was now holding evidence that she had not. She invested money in something with a friend, Emily said, a small business. It failed. Badly. How much? Enough that she took out a personal loan and used almost 2 years paying it back. Adam stared through the dirty window. She never told us. No. Why? There's a letter she wrote to Aunt Claire, but apparently never mailed. She said she was embarrassed. She said she didn't want us worrying that she couldn't keep things together after Dad left. Adam's hand tightened around the phone. In his memory, Evelyn Parker had endured abandonment by becoming more capable than everyone around her. She balanced bills, fixed faucets, negotiated insurance claims, drove herself to medical appointments, never asked Adam to come home unless she truly needed him. He had built part of himself around that woman. Now Emily was telling him that the foundation had cracks he had never seen. She fixed it, Adam said eventually. Yes, on her own. Yes, Emily paused. That doesn't mean she should have had to. Adam closed his eyes. There was the difference. For years he had interpreted secrecy, followed by survival, as strength. Maybe sometimes it was shame with good bookkeeping. Adam? I'm here. You okay? He almost gave the automatic answer. Fine. Instead he said, I don't know. Emily was quiet for a moment. Good, he frowned. Good? You finally found something you can't categorize in 10 seconds. Despite himself, Adam smiled. When the call ended, he remained at the window. Outside, Nancy stood beneath the ruined movie screen, staring at the ground, while Rachel spoke on her phone. For the first time, Adam considered that Helen might not be fundamentally different from his mother. Perhaps independence could become a disguise. Perhaps capable people could become trapped by the very reputation that once protected them. Rachel returned. The store exists. Frank Dawson is the owner. He confirmed Helen called yesterday and asked for an appointment today. Nancy looked toward the road. So that's where she's going. Rachel said, It's where she planned to go. Adam heard the distinction. This time he respected it. Before leaving, he went back into the office for one last look. That was when he noticed the newspaper beneath the blanket. He pulled it free. Sunday crossword, almost finished. Helen's pencil marks were precise, unlike the heavily erased answer they had found in the Buick. Only one clue remained blank. Adam read it. What remains after a mistake? He counted the empty squares. Nancy came to stand beside him. What's the answer? Adam studied the puzzle. He could think of several possibilities: memory, damage, lesson, pride. Nothing fit with certainty. Helen had apparently been unable, or unwilling, to decide either. Adam folded the newspaper carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Nancy watched him. "She always finishes those." Adam looked at the empty watch case, then at the blanket where Helen had spent the night, rather than return to her daughter.
"No," he said quietly. "I don't think she came here because she didn't know how to get home." Nancy's eyes filled, but she did not look away. Adam understood the shape of the problem now. Helen Cooper was not trying to replace $68,000, not really. She was trying to restore the woman she had been before she answered that phone call. The careful woman, the independent widow, the grandmother who could still be trusted with her own life. And somewhere between the empty watch case and the unfinished crossword, Adam began to suspect that the harder she tried to erase her mistake, the more she might erase with it. By early afternoon, Lexington had turned bright beneath a clearing April sky, the morning gray lifting just enough for sunlight to flash against storefront windows and wet pavement. Dawson Antiques and Estate Jewelry occupied the corner of an old brick building on a quieter street, away from the busiest part of downtown. Its front window displayed pocket watches, silver serving pieces, old wedding rings, and framed photographs whose owners had long since become strangers. Adam Parker arrived with Nancy Cooper almost 40 minutes before Helen's scheduled appointment. Deputy Rachel Moore had already contacted local authorities and confirmed that Helen had entered the store voluntarily. There was no emergency waiting behind the glass door, no kidnappers, no accident, no frightened stranger holding her against her will. Somehow that made Nancy more nervous. "She's inside?" Nancy asked. Adam looked through the front window. "Looks like it." Nancy moved immediately. Adam caught her forearm lightly. "Wait." She turned sharply. "We've been waiting since yesterday." "I know." "She's my mother." "I know that too." Nancy pulled free, not violently, but with enough force to make the point. "Then don't stop me." Adam let her go. He understood the urge. Finding Helen should have been the end of something. People imagined missing person searches that way. A door opened, a face appeared, someone cried, and relief arrived whole. But Adam had lived long enough to know that discovery was often only the moment the harder problem became visible. They entered. A small brass bell sounded above the door. The store smelled faintly of furniture polish, old paper, and coffee. Glass display cases formed neat aisles across polished hardwood floors. Behind a wide oak counter stood Frank Dawson, 64 years old, tall but slightly stooped through the shoulders, with a narrow frame, silver hair swept carefully back, and a trimmed white mustache above a thoughtful mouth. His face was long and lightly weathered, with deep lines around dark brown eyes that suggested more listening than talking. Frank had spent nearly 40 years buying estate jewelry, watches, and small collections from families around central Kentucky. He had learned that objects were rarely just objects when people brought them across his counter. A gold watch might be worth $3,000 to a collector and 30 years of Sunday mornings to the person selling it. Because of that, Frank had developed a habit that occasionally cost him business. When grief, fear, or desperation seemed louder than the price being discussed, he slowed the transaction down. Frank looked toward Adam and Nancy. Before he spoke, Nancy saw her. Helen Cooper sat at a small consultation table near the back. For several seconds, Nancy did not move. Helen was 72, small and slender, perhaps 5'4", with pale skin and fine lines around light blue eyes that still carried a direct, almost school secretary sharpness. Her silver-gray hair had been brushed into a neat chin-length shape, despite the night spent at Blue Moon Drive-In. She wore navy slacks, sensible brown loafers, a cream blouse, and the pale yellow cardigan Nancy had described the night before. Nothing about her looked lost. A little tired, yes. Her shoulders seemed smaller than they probably had a week earlier, but her posture remained straight. On the table in front of her lay 6 watches. Thomas Cooper's watches, the gold anniversary watch, the old Hamilton, a stainless steel Longines, 3 others worn more heavily, their leather straps darkened by years of use. Helen looked up. Her face went completely still.
Nancy. The relief Nancy had been holding for nearly 2 days broke through as anger. Mom! Helen closed her eyes briefly. Nancy crossed the room. Do you have any idea what you've put everyone through? Frank looked at Adam, then quietly stepped away from the counter. Helen's mouth tightened. I left you a message. You told me you needed a few days. You did not tell me you were abandoning your car beside some road and disappearing. I did not abandon it. You left your phone in it. I didn't want to be called every 5 minutes. And Sadie? That landed differently. Helen looked down. What about Sadie? She got out of the car. Helen's head snapped up. What? Nancy's voice shook. She ran down the road. She ended up at a stranger's house. Helen's color changed. Is she hurt? No. Where is she? Safe. Helen pressed one hand against the table. Adam noticed her fingers trembling. Frank finally spoke. Mrs. Cooper hasn't completed any sale. Nancy turned toward him. Frank introduced himself and explained in a calm, measured voice that Helen had brought the watches in for valuation. He had examined them but had not purchased anything. Why not? Nancy asked. Frank glanced toward Helen before answering. Because your mother knew what the watches were worth. Helen's eyes narrowed slightly. That sounds like a strange reason not to buy them. Frank gave a small shrug. She knew the market values. I wasn't worried she was being cheated. Then what were you worried about? Frank folded his hands. That she wanted the transaction finished too quickly? Helen's jaw tightened. Frank continued gently. People who are ready to sell usually ask what something is worth. Your mother kept asking how quickly I could pay. Silence settled over the shop. Nancy stared at the watches. Mom, you were going to sell Dad's things to replace the money. Helen looked at her. To replace some of it. You can't replace $68,000 with 6 watches. I can replace part. That isn't the point. It is exactly the point. Nancy took a breath. No. The point is, you should come home. Helen's expression changed. There it was again, Adam thought. That word, should. A small word people often used when they wanted authority without admitting it. Helen stood. I am not going home with you. Nancy stared at her. What? I said I'm not going home with you. Mom, you've been sleeping in an abandoned drive-in. One night. You walked away from your car. I knew where I was. You left your medication. I took my medication. You left your phone. That was intentional. Nancy's frustration rose. Do you hear yourself? Helen's eyes flashed. Yes, perfectly. That is the problem, Nancy. Everyone keeps talking as if I can't. Frank looked away, giving them the privacy of not being watched, even while standing 10 feet away. Nancy lowered her voice. You were scammed. Yes. You lost almost everything you saved. I know exactly what I lost. And then you disappeared. I left because every time you looked at me, I could see you calculating what I should no longer be trusted to do. That's not fair. No. I was trying to protect you. Helen laughed once without humor. From what? Telephones? Banks? Myself? Maybe. The word escaped before Nancy could stop it. Helen went very still. Adam stepped forward. He told himself he was preventing the argument from getting worse. That was probably true, at least partly. Helen, he said, Nancy's scared. There are practical things that need to happen now. Helen looked at him. Adam continued. You should freeze or restructure the accounts, change your number, put additional verification on withdrawals. Report everything formally if you haven't already. It might also make sense to give Nancy access to monitor the accounts for a while. Helen said nothing. Adam mistook the silence for permission. You could set a transaction threshold. Anything above that would require a second authorization. You could also, Mr. Parker. He stopped. Helen's voice was quiet. Are you helping me? Adam looked at her. Or are you managing me?
The question entered the room with almost no force. That made it worse. Adam opened his mouth. Nothing useful came. Helen waited. For a man accustomed to making decisions under pressure, uncertainty had always felt like a defect to correct quickly. He could explain every recommendation he had just made. Each one was sensible. Several were probably wise. But wisdom chosen for someone was not the same thing as wisdom chosen by them. Adam glanced at Nancy, then at Helen. He remembered Emily's question from the night before. If you made one catastrophic mistake, would you want me helping you recover, or deciding you were no longer allowed to make decisions? Adam looked away first. The bell above the front door sounded.
Rachel entered, carrying Sadie. The puppy had been resting in Nancy's SUV under Rachel's supervision while the first conversation happened. Now the small German shepherd squirmed in Rachel's arms, black and tan legs dangling awkwardly, one ear upright and the other still refusing to cooperate. Helen inhaled. Sadie. Rachel set the puppy down. Everyone expected what came next. Sadie would run to Helen. Helen would kneel, the dog would leap into her arms, some invisible tension would break. Real life declined the invitation. Sadie took 3 steps forward and stopped. Nancy stood on one side, Helen stood on the other. Adam was behind them. Frank remained near the counter. Too many bodies, too many voices, too much tension. Sadie's ears flattened. She looked at Helen, then Nancy, then back toward the door. A small whine came from her throat. Come here, baby, Helen whispered. Sadie lowered her body but did not move. Helen crouched carefully. The puppy still hesitated. That hesitation hurt Helen more visibly than anything Nancy had said. She's afraid of me. No, Adam said. Helen looked at him. She's afraid of the room. The distinction mattered. Adam crouched several feet away but did not touch Sadie. Nobody called her. Nobody reached. The room grew quiet. After almost half a minute, Sadie moved. Not toward Helen, not toward Nancy. She walked into the empty space between them and sat. Then she began to cry softly. Helen covered her mouth. Nancy's eyes filled. Sadie's small body trembled as though she had been asked to carry a conflict far larger than herself. Helen sank into the chair. I left her in the car for 10 minutes. Nancy did not speak. I needed to walk, just to think. I cracked the back window. I thought she was asleep. Helen looked at Sadie. I came back and she was gone. Adam understood another piece. Helen had returned to the Buick, found Sadie missing, and instead of staying there, he almost asked. But Helen answered without being prompted. I searched. I walked both directions. I called until my voice hurt. Then I thought maybe she'd gone toward the houses. Her eyes closed. I couldn't find her. Nancy whispered, Why didn't you call me? Helen looked at her, and there it was. Not stubbornness, not anger. Something smaller. I was ashamed to make one more call, asking somebody to fix something I had done wrong. Nobody had an answer for that. Eventually, Sadie crept forward. She reached Helen's shoes and sniffed them. Helen did not reach down. Sadie leaned against one ankle. Only then did Helen touch her, one hand, lightly. Helen began crying without making a sound. Later, after Frank packed the watches back into their walnut case, Rachel confirmed that Helen was not legally missing against her will and did not require medical intervention. Helen agreed to contact the sheriff's office herself and make clear she was safe. He also promised Nancy she would not vanish without telling someone again. But when Nancy said, let's go home, Helen shook her head. No. Nancy's shoulders sagged. Mom, I need one night. You've already had one night. I need one where nobody is looking for me. Nancy looked toward Adam. He could see what she wanted. Support, authority, someone else to make Helen understand. He almost gave it. Then he remembered the crossword in his pocket. One unanswered square. A question that did not become dangerous simply because it remained unfinished. Helen had already reserved a room at a small motel nearby. She wanted to sleep, shower, and think before deciding what came next. Nancy opened her mouth. Adam shook his head slightly. She's safe. Nancy stared at him. That isn't enough. No, Adam said, but maybe it's enough for tonight. Helen looked at him. Adam stepped away from the table. We found her, he said quietly. Now maybe she gets to decide the next step. Nancy did not agree. Not yet, but she stopped arguing. Helen lifted the wooden watch case. Sadie walked beside her toward the door, and for the first time since the puppy had appeared crying on Adam's porch, Adam allowed someone he wanted to protect to walk away without following. Night settled quietly over Lexington, not with drama, but with the ordinary sounds of traffic fading beyond motel curtains, an ice machine humming somewhere down the hall, and pipes knocking softly inside walls that had heard thousands of strangers sleep badly. Helen Cooper sat at the small laminate desk in her room, wearing the same pale yellow cardigan she had worn at Frank Dawson's store. The 6 watches were locked inside their walnut case on the chair beside her. Her reading glasses rested near the telephone. For nearly 20 minutes, Helen had been staring at the number written on the bank's fraud information sheet without dialing it. She had spent 72 years learning how to do things herself. She had balanced household budgets when Thomas's carpentry jobs became irregular, raised a daughter, buried a husband, handled insurance forms, property taxes, repairs, and all the small humiliations that accompany growing older in a world increasingly designed around passwords nobody remembers creating. She had never considered independence a heroic quality. It was simply how adulthood worked. You paid what you owed. You showed up when expected. You tried not to make your problems someone else's burden. But now that simple rule had twisted itself into something cruel. Every time Helen imagined telling another stranger exactly how the scam had happened, she heard the same invisible question beneath their polite voices. How could you have fallen for that? She picked up the phone, put it down, picked it up again. The absurdity almost made her laugh. A week earlier, she had sent more than $68,000 after one frightened call. Now she could barely make a free telephone call to ask for help. Helen finally dialed. After several automated prompts, a woman from the bank's fraud department answered. Helen did not ask her name twice when she missed it the first time. That small choice mattered. A week earlier, Helen might have pretended to hear because asking someone to repeat themselves made her feel old. Tonight, she simply said, "I'm sorry, would you say that again?" The woman repeated herself patiently. Helen took a breath. "My name is Helen Cooper. I think I was the victim of a scam." There. Nothing happened. No ceiling collapsed, no alarm sounded, no stranger appeared to revoke her adulthood. The bank representative began asking questions. Helen answered them all. She did not say the caller had been unusually convincing, when what she meant was that she had been terrified. She did not claim the transfer had happened because the bank's system was confusing. He did not omit the part where she had ignored the uneasy feeling in her stomach because someone pretending to be a lawyer told her Ryan needed immediate help. "I sent it," Helen said. "I authorized both transfers." The words burned. The representative's voice remained calm. "That doesn't mean you intended to give money to a criminal." Helen closed her eyes. It was such an ordinary sentence, yet it separated two things Helen had spent days treating as identical: making a mistake and deserving what happened afterward. The bank could make no promises. Some of the money had already moved through several accounts. But because the transfers were recent, investigators might still be able to trace or freeze part of the funds if she completed the required fraud reports quickly. Helen was given case numbers, instructions, and a list of documents to bring to a branch the next morning. She wrote everything down. At one point, her hand began trembling badly enough that the sand struck the paper in short black marks. The woman on the line asked, "Would you like me to wait while you get someone to help you write this?" Helen almost said no. The word had already reached the back of her throat, then she stopped. "No," Helen said slowly. "I think I have it." A pause. "But thank you for asking." When the call ended, Helen remained at the desk. The money was not back. Thomas was still gone. Nancy was still hurt.
Sadie had still run frightened down a road because Helen had been so consumed by her own shame that one small mistake had become another. Nothing had been repaired simply because Helen told the truth, yet the room felt different, not lighter exactly, more honest. Perhaps that was the first form relief took when happiness was still too ambitious. Across town in Berea, Adam Parker was discovering that Sadie had declared war on order. Helen had asked him to keep the puppy for one night after learning that the motel would not allow pets. Nancy had offered to take Sadie, but Helen saw immediately that her daughter needed distance from everything connected to the argument. Adam had been the least complicated option, at least that had been the theory. Within 20 minutes of entering the Parker house, Sadie stepped directly into her water bowl and overturned it across the kitchen floor. Adam stared at the spreading puddle. Sadie stared at him. Then she shook herself. Water sprayed across the cabinet doors. "Excellent," Adam said. Sadie wagged once, apparently mistaking sarcasm for praise. He cleaned the floor, relocated the bowl, and folded an old towel beneath it. 10 minutes later, Sadie dragged the towel into the living room. Adam retrieved it. Sadie stole it again. By the third attempt, Adam realized the puppy was enjoying the operation considerably more than he was. "You understand, I have negotiated with armed men who were less unreasonable." Sadie bit one corner of the towel and pulled. Adam pulled gently back. The puppy growled theatrically. Despite himself, he laughed. It surprised him enough that he released the towel. Sadie fell backward, rolled once, then sprang up as though the entire event had gone according to plan. Later, she stole one of Adam's socks and pushed herself halfway underneath the sofa before discovering she could not reverse while holding it. Adam had to move the sofa several inches to retrieve both dog and sock. Then, while he was making coffee, Sadie stuck her head into a paper grocery bag trying to reach a forgotten cracker. The bag came with her when she backed away. Sadie froze, then began walking backward in terrified confusion, the paper bag covering her face. Adam crossed the kitchen quickly, removed it, and checked her. She was fine. She immediately tried putting her head back inside. Adam looked at the ceiling. "You learned nothing." Sadie licked his wrist. That small, ridiculous moment did something Adam had not expected. He had spent years believing that when something went wrong, the correct response was assessment, cause, risk, solution, prevention. But Sadie had overturned water, so he wiped it up. She had stolen a sock, so he retrieved it. She had gotten stuck in a bag, so he removed the bag. There was no deeper failure to diagnose, no permanent system to redesign, no reason to make the puppy ashamed of being a puppy. Some problems did not need to become lessons. Some simply needed cleaning up. Adam sat on the floor beside her. Sadie climbed across one of his legs and fell asleep there almost instantly. Her body felt absurdly small against him. He thought of Helen in that motel room. Maybe human beings made certain mistakes unbearable because they insisted every mistake reveal something permanent about the person who made it. Careless, weak, too old, untrustworthy, broken. A spilled bowl of water was allowed to be only spilled water. Why were people so rarely granted the same mercy? The next morning, Helen sat on the edge of the motel bed with her phone in her hand. Nancy's number was open on the screen. This call frightened Helen more than the bank. The bank representative had not loved her. Nancy did. Love raised the stakes. Helen pressed call. Nancy answered before the second ring. "Mom? I'm all right." A long exhale came through the phone. "I know. I called the bank last night." Silence. Nancy started to say something, then stopped herself. Helen noticed. "The fraud department says there may be a chance to trace some of the money. No promises." "That's good." "Yes." Another silence. Helen looked toward the walnut watch case. "I need to go to the branch this morning. There are forms. They want identification and some transfer documents." "I can take care of—" Nancy stopped. Helen almost smiled. Old habits did not disappear because one argument exposed them. "Mom?" Nancy tried again. "What do you need?" Helen swallowed.
The answer was painfully small. Not rescue, not management, not a daughter taking over her passwords and accounts. Company. She had been alone when Thomas died because Nancy had been 40 minutes away. She had been alone when the scammer called. She had spent the following days trying to prove that being alone was evidence of strength. Maybe it never had been. "Could you go with me?" Nancy said nothing for several seconds. Helen's throat tightened. Then Nancy answered, "Yes." Helen closed her eyes. "Just with me." "I understand. No taking over. I understand. And if I forget something, you may remind me once." Nancy laughed through what sounded suspiciously like tears. "Once? Don't abuse the privilege." For the first time in days, Helen smiled. Later that morning, Adam brought Sadie back. Helen knelt slowly when the puppy approached, allowing Sadie to decide the final distance herself. Sadie sniffed Helen's hands and then leaned against her shin as though the previous day's uncertainty had exhausted whatever pride a German Shepherd puppy might possess. Adam did not ask Helen what the bank had promised. He did not offer a strategy. He simply handed over Sadie's red leash. "You're tiny criminal," he said. Helen looked down at the puppy. "What did she destroy?" "Define destroy." Helen laughed. It was brief but real. When Adam returned to the Parker house, Emily was sitting at the dining table with another stack of their mother's belongings. A Sunday crossword lay open beside her. Adam recognized Evelyn's handwriting immediately. He sat down. "Found that in the kitchen drawer," Emily said. Most of the puzzle was unfinished. Adam took a pencil and began filling the clues while Emily sorted envelopes nearby. Once he would have finished quickly. He disliked leaving puzzles incomplete almost as much as he disliked unanswered questions. This time he slowed down. 10 minutes later, only one square remained blank. Emily leaned over. "You know that one?" Adam nodded. "So?" The pencil hovered. Sadie's overturned water bowl came back to him, Helen admitting she had been scammed, Nancy asking what her mother needed instead of deciding for her. His mother's old hidden loan. One blank square. Nothing terrible happened. Adam placed the pencil on the table. Emily stared at him. "You're leaving it?" "For now." She smiled. "Who are you?" Adam leaned back. "Tomorrow." The words sat quietly between them, and for once, tomorrow did not sound like a failure to finish today. By mid-May, spring had settled fully over central Kentucky. The hills around Berea were dense with green, porch railings had begun collecting yellow pollen, and the evenings stayed bright long enough for people to forget how quickly several weeks could pass. Helen Cooper had returned home with Sadie, though returned did not mean life had snapped back into its previous shape. The kitchen was the same. Thomas's old coffee mug still occupied the second shelf because Helen could never quite bring herself to move it. The hallway clock still gained 3 minutes every month. But the numbers inside Helen's bank account were different, and some mornings she woke before sunrise with the brief, merciful belief that the scam had been a bad dream. Then memory arrived. It always did. The bank's fraud department and investigators had managed to trace and freeze part of the transferred money before it moved beyond recovery. Helen received a little more than $26,000 back. The remaining amount was gone, scattered through accounts she would probably never know and controlled by people whose faces she would never see. No miracle returned it. That fact mattered. Helen had discovered that people were uncomfortable with losses that stayed lost. They wanted stories to behave like arithmetic: mistake, lesson, redemption, restoration. Something went wrong, therefore something equally meaningful ought to make it right. Real life was less considerate. Sometimes a person learned the lesson and still paid the bill. At first, Helen treated the recovered money as evidence she could rebuild everything. She sat at her kitchen table with a calculator, pension statements, insurance estimates, and several pages of handwritten figures. She calculated what she could cut. Travel first. Then the roof repair could wait another year. She could reduce charitable giving. Perhaps stop eating out entirely. She even calculated what selling all 6 of Thomas's watches might produce. Nancy arrived during one of those sessions and found her mother surrounded by numbers. "You're doing it again," Nancy said. Helen looked up. "Doing what?" "Trying to make it disappear." "I'm making a budget." "You've made 14 budgets." 15, Nancy exhaled. Helen almost smiled. Their relationship had not transformed into effortless understanding. Nancy still arrived with suggestions folded neatly into her purse like emergency supplies. Helen still heard control in sentences that were sometimes only concern. But something had changed in the space between them. Nancy had begun asking before acting. "What do you want to do?" she said. Helen looked at the 6 watches on the table. That question would once have irritated her. Now she considered it. "I don't want to sell all of them." "Then don't." "I may need to sell some." Nancy sat across from her. "Which ones?" They spent the next hour talking instead of deciding. Over the following week, Helen took the watches back to Frank Dawson, not in panic, and not alone. Nancy accompanied her, but waited quietly while Helen asked the questions herself. Helen eventually sold 2. One was the gold anniversary watch, handsome and valuable but rarely worn by Thomas because he always said gold made his wrists look too important. The other was a Longines that had spent most of its life in a dresser drawer after the leather band cracked. Frank paid fairly. Helen signed the paperwork without trembling. She kept 4 watches. The least valuable of them was an old Timex with a scratched crystal, faded numbers, and a cheap brown leather band darkened by years of sweat. Frank had once estimated that it was worth less than a nice dinner. Helen held it longer than all the others. Thomas had worn that watch while mowing the lawn, fixing fence posts, painting the garage, and once while attempting to repair the washing machine before admitting halfway through that he did not understand washing machines. Helen remembered him lying on the laundry room floor surrounded by tools. "I have discovered the problem," he had announced. "What?" "I shouldn't have touched it." That memory made her laugh aloud in Frank's store. Nancy looked over. Helen slipped the Timex into her handbag. "This one stays." The watches she sold helped. They did not erase the loss. Helen was slowly learning that those were different goals. A few weeks later, she agreed to speak at the Berea Public Library during an afternoon program on phone scams targeting older adults. The invitation had frightened her more than she expected. She considered canceling twice. By the day of the event, nearly 30 people had gathered in a small community room between shelves of large print novels and local history books. Most were over 65. A few adult children sat beside parents. Coffee steamed from paper cups on a folding table near the door. Helen stood at the front wearing navy slacks, a soft blue blouse, and Thomas's battered Timex around her wrist. She did not pretend to be brave. "My name is Helen Cooper," she began, "and several weeks ago I gave a criminal $68,000 because I believed my grandson needed help." The room became completely quiet. Not shocked, attentive. Helen had expected embarrassment to feel like standing naked beneath bright lights. Instead, it felt strangely ordinary. She explained the call, the fake attorney, the frightened voice, the urgency, the transfers. She did not dramatize it. Then she said the part she had come to understand only afterward. "The worst thing the criminal did was take my money. The worst thing I did to myself happened afterward." Several faces lifted. "I became so ashamed that I stopped telling the truth. I thought if my daughter knew exactly how badly I had failed, she would never trust me again. So I tried to solve it secretly. I left home. I almost sold things I wasn't ready to lose." Helen looked around the room. Shame likes privacy. That is why it grows so well. No one applauded immediately. Helen was grateful. Applause would have made her feel like she had performed suffering successfully. Instead, an older man in the second row simply nodded. A woman near the back wiped her glasses. Afterward, people approached Helen one at a time. The last was Margaret Lewis, 76, a short, broad-bodied widow with tightly curled white hair, warm brown skin, and careful dark eyes behind oversized burgundy glasses. Margaret had spent 42 years working in a hospital laundry department and spoke with the firm, practical rhythm of someone accustomed to fixing problems before anyone noticed them. Since her husband's death 4 years earlier, she had become fiercely private about money because she hated the assumption that widowhood had made her helpless. Margaret waited until almost everyone else had left. Then she said, "I got one of those calls yesterday." Helen did not react dramatically. "What happened?" "They said my nephew was in trouble." Margaret tightened both hands around her handbag. "I didn't send anything." "That's good." "I almost did." Helen waited. Margaret looked toward the door. "I haven't told my daughters." Helen understood instantly, not because they shared the same story, because they shared the same silence. "Why not?" Margaret gave a tired smile. "You know why." Helen did. She did not tell Margaret what to do. He simply said, "Do you want me to sit with you while you call them?" Margaret stared at her, then nodded. Across town, Adam Parker was facing a decision of his own. The offer came from Commander Mark Ellis, 49, a career Navy officer Adam had known for nearly 12 years. Mark was a lean, 6-foot man with close-cropped salt-and-pepper hair, a narrow, angular face, deep-set blue eyes, and the permanent crease between his eyebrows of someone who had spent decades reading reports nobody else wanted to finish. He was not sentimental and rarely wasted words. Years earlier, after an injury forced him away from operational work, Mark had moved into training and discovered that teaching judgment was harder than teaching technique. That difficulty had become the work he respected most. He called Adam one afternoon. "We're expanding the training and advisory side." Adam leaned against the Parker kitchen counter. "You want me?" "I wouldn't have called if I wanted someone else." "What, exactly?" "Mentoring younger teams, evaluation work, scenario development, less deployment tempo." Once, Adam would have begun calculating before Mark finished speaking. Career progression, operational relevance, long-term benefits, drawbacks. Instead, he asked, "When do you need an answer?" Mark paused. 2 weeks? All right. You don't want details? I do. You usually want them before I finish the first sentence. Adam looked through the window. I'm trying something new. Mark's silence carried suspicion. Should I be concerned? Probably. Mark gave a dry laugh. Adam did not decide that day, or the next. Emily noticed. She found him one evening at the porch table with information about the position folded beside his coffee. So, what's the plan? She asked. Adam looked at her. Then, instead of answering, he said, What do you think I want? Emily stopped. Who are you, and where did you put my brother? Answer the question. She smiled. I think you want to teach. I also think you're afraid you'll interpret choosing something different as becoming less useful. Adam considered that. Months earlier, he would have asked whether she thought the job was the correct move. Now the more important question seemed to be whether it was a life he wanted. He allowed himself not to know yet. The following Sunday, Adam drove to Helen's house to return a casserole dish Emily had somehow managed to leave there. Helen was on the porch. Sadie lay sprawled across the boards beneath her chair, now larger through the shoulders but still hilariously unfinished, her black and tan body seeming to grow faster than coordination could follow. Both ears stood most of the time, though the left one occasionally folded when she was tired. Helen had a Sunday crossword balanced on her knee. Adam sat in the neighboring chair. For several minutes they said nothing. Sadie snored. Adam glanced at the puzzle, almost complete. One answer remained blank. You missed one. Helen looked down. I know. Adam waited. Aren't you going to finish it? Helen folded the newspaper. Next week. Adam looked at the pencil lying beside her. Once he would have picked it up. Instead, he leaned back, Sadie rolled onto her side and kicked one enormous paw against his boot. Helen smiled. Adam did too. The empty square remained empty, and nobody rushed to save it. By late August, the hills around Berea had deepened into the heavy green of summer, and the air carried that warm, dusty stillness that arrives before autumn begins to announce itself. The Parker house no longer looked like a place waiting to be emptied. Most of the boxes were gone, the walls were bare where photographs had once hung, and only a few pieces of furniture remained for the final handover. Adam Parker had made his decision 3 weeks earlier. He had accepted Commander Mark Ellis's offer to move into a training and advisory role, a position that would keep him inside the Navy SEAL community while changing the rhythm of his work. He was not retiring. He was not abandoning the life that had shaped him. And he was certainly not staying in Kentucky because a German shepherd puppy had once appeared crying on his porch. That kind of ending belonged to simpler stories, the kind where one dramatic moment permanently rearranged a person's future. Adam knew better now. People rarely change direction because of one thing. More often, 100 small recognitions accumulated until the old direction simply stopped feeling inevitable. Emily had taken the news with predictable restraint. "So you finally decided?" Adam had nodded. "You want me to congratulate you?" "If you feel strongly compelled." "I don't," he had smiled. Emily had then hugged him anyway. Their relationship had not become magically gentle over the summer. She still considered Adam unnecessarily precise about almost everything. He still believed Emily's definition of organized was criminally flexible. They had argued over which boxes belonged in storage, whether 3 chipped bowls counted as family history, and whether their mother would have wanted anyone to keep a broken lamp. The difference was that Adam no longer treated disagreement as evidence that one person had to win. Emily no longer mistook his need for order as proof he did not trust her. They had become slightly better at allowing each other to remain themselves. That afternoon, the day before Adam was scheduled to leave Kentucky, he drove toward Helen Cooper's house. He told himself it was a simple goodbye. He had learned to distrust sentences that began that way. Helen's property sat along a quiet road bordered by maples and old split-rail fencing. The house was modest, cream-colored, with green shutters Thomas had painted himself years earlier. One shutter leaned slightly crooked now. Helen had noticed. Nancy had offered to have it repaired. Helen had said she would call someone when it bothered her enough. Nancy had apparently managed not to fix it secretly. That counted as progress. Adam slowed near the mailbox. He had not even reached the driveway when movement exploded from the porch. Sadie. The German shepherd was nearly 7 months old now, and looked as if nature had assembled her in the wrong order. Her black and tan coat had grown sleek across her back. Both ears stood almost completely upright, and her chest was beginning to broaden. But her legs remained absurdly long compared with the rest of her body. Her paws still seemed borrowed from the adult dog she would eventually become. She recognized Adam's truck, that was obvious. Sadie tore across the yard with such enthusiasm that she overshot the gravel drive, skidded in the grass, corrected herself, and continued without appearing embarrassed in the slightest. Adam barely had time to step out. "Sadie!" She launched herself upward. 2 front paws struck his chest. Adam caught her automatically. Then came the sound, high, broken, urgent. For one instant his body remembered before his mind did. The porch, the empty road, the Buick, Helen's missing phone. That desperate puppy cry that had once meant something was terribly wrong. Adam's shoulders tightened. Helen's laughter reached him from the porch. "Don't start solving anything." Adam looked up. Helen stood beside her chair wearing beige slacks and a pale green blouse, silver-gray hair tucked neatly behind one ear. At 72, she still looked slender and self-contained, though there was less tension in the way she carried herself now. Thomas's battered Timex rested around her left wrist. "She sounds distressed," Adam said. Helen folded her arms. "She does that whenever she sees someone she likes." Sadie cried again and licked Adam's beard. Helen added, "Also when dinner is 6 minutes late, when squirrels refuse to cooperate, and when the vacuum cleaner has committed some personal offense. Adam lowered Sadie. The dog immediately leaned against his legs. So I'm no longer special. Oh, you're special, Helen said. Jot in the way you prefer. Adam laughed. For the first time, Sadie's cry asked nothing of him. No hidden emergency, no road to follow, no problem waiting at the end. It was simply joy without manners. He found that strangely comforting. Helen poured iced tea on the porch while Sadie collapsed beneath the table with the exhausted dignity of an animal who had run 40 yards as though completing a military operation. Nancy arrived 10 minutes later. Their relationship, Adam had learned, had improved in the most believable way possible, imperfectly. Nancy still called every Sunday, sometimes twice. Helen had once demanded to know why a woman who could coordinate a medical clinic apparently believed her mother might perish between breakfast and lunch. Nancy had responded that answering the phone was easier than organizing another search party. They had both laughed. Then they had argued 5 minutes later about a roofer. The significant change was apparent was what happened afterward. Nancy no longer said, "You're doing this." She asked, "What are you thinking of doing?" Helen still occasionally withheld information because she did not want to worry her daughter. But when Nancy discovered it, Helen no longer disappeared behind anger. She was learning that privacy and secrecy were not always the same thing. That afternoon, Nancy noticed a letter on Helen's kitchen counter. "What's that?" "Insurance." "Everything okay?" Helen gave her a look. Nancy stopped herself, then tried again. "Do you want to tell me?" Helen considered the question. "Not yet." Nancy's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "All right." Nothing exploded. No one stormed out. Adam watched from the porch doorway and thought how unimpressive healthy change often looked from the outside. No speeches, no music, just one person resisting the urge to control and another resisting the urge to disappear. Later, Emily stopped by, carrying a small cardboard box Adam had accidentally left at the Parker house. "You forgot this." Adam frowned. "I labeled everything." "Yes, which makes forgetting the box labeled personal strangely poetic." She handed it to him. Helen smiled. "I like her." "You've said that before." "I continue to mean it." Emily sat for a while, and within minutes she and Adam were arguing over whether he had packed enough casual clothes. "You cannot live in navy shirts." "I own other shirts." "You own 6 identical gray shirts. They're different shades." Emily looked toward Helen. "You see what I endured as a child?" Adam said, "You once stored a library book in the refrigerator." "I was 9. You remember the title?" Emily stared at him. Helen started laughing before either sibling did. There was something deeply human in the scene, Adam thought. People talked endlessly about healing as though it meant becoming serene. Sometimes healing looked more like being able to annoy one another without fearing the relationship would break. Before Emily left, she hugged him tightly. "Call me when you get there." "I will." "Not 3 days later." "I understand how phones work." "You understand radios." "Phones remain unproven." Adam let her have the last word. Almost. By late afternoon, Nancy and Emily were gone. Adam remained on the porch with Helen. Sadie slept beneath the chair, one paw twitching in some private dream. On the table rested the Sunday crossword. Adam noticed it without meaning to. Most of the squares were filled in Helen's neat pencil. One remained blank. He leaned closer. "You missed one." Helen did not look down. "I know." Adam waited. Months earlier, those 2 words would have irritated him. Knowing a problem existed and refusing to solve it seemed almost irresponsible. Now he asked, "Hard clue?" "No." "You know the answer?" "Probably." Helen picked up the pencil. For a moment, Adam thought she would write. Instead, she rested the tip above the empty square. "You know what I used to hate about these?" she asked. "What?" "Being wrong in ink." Adam glanced at the pencil. "That's why you use pencil." "Exactly," she smiled. Thomas said that told him everything he needed to know about me. What did he mean? He said I wanted the privilege of certainty without the risk of permanence. Adam looked at her. That sounds irritatingly perceptive. He was unbearable. They sat quietly. Helen rolled the pencil between her fingers. I spent a long time thinking what happened to me meant something larger than what happened. Adam waited. That I was getting foolish, that I was becoming dependent, that Nancy would never trust me again, that one mistake had uncovered some truth about who I was becoming. She looked toward Sadie. It didn't. No. It was still a terrible mistake. Yes. Helen nodded, appreciating the absence of false comfort. That matters too. Adam understood. Mercy did not require pretending consequences were painless. Helen had lost money. She had frightened her daughter. She had walked away. Those things did not become beautiful simply because something useful came afterward. But neither did they become her entire identity. She placed the pencil down. Next week. Adam smiled. You're leaving it blank? For now. He did not reach for the pencil. When the sun began lowering behind the trees, Adam stood. Helen walked him to the truck. Sadie seemed to sense the departure before anyone announced it. She followed Adam to the driver's door and pressed against his leg. He scratched behind her ears. You caused a lot of trouble. Sadie sneezed. I'm taking that as agreement. Helen stood several feet away. Drive safely. I will. And don't call me from every stop to make sure I haven't been scammed again. Adam looked at her. I wasn't planning to. Good. A beat passed. Maybe every second stop. Helen pointed toward the truck. Go. Adam climbed in. The engine started. He waved once and pulled onto the road. In the mirror, he saw Sadie begin running after him. Not far, only across the yard toward the driveway. Helen called her name. Sadie stopped. For several seconds, the young German shepherd stood between two directions. The departing truck, the porch. Then she turned. Adam watched in the mirror as Sadie ran back to Helen. He did not slow down. Behind him, Helen returned to her chair. Sadie settled beside her feet, long legs folding awkwardly beneath a body still growing into itself. The Sunday crossword waited on the table. Helen lifted the pencil, touched it to the final empty square, and stopped. She looked toward the road where Adam's truck had disappeared. Then she set the pencil down. The square stayed white. Once, Helen might have seen that emptiness as proof she had failed to finish something. Adam might once have seen it as a problem waiting for someone competent enough to solve it. Neither believed that anymore. Helen had lost money she would never recover, but she had regained the right to make decisions without pretending she could never be wrong. Adam had not become a different man. He was still disciplined, still observant, still inclined to organize a room before sitting comfortably in it. But he had learned that protecting someone did not always mean taking the wheel from them. And Sadie, the frightened puppy who had once run crying onto a stranger's porch, lay sleeping at the feet of the woman she had found her way back to. Nothing had returned exactly as it was. That was not tragedy. That was simply life moving forward without asking permission to remain unfinished. The house still held laughter. Sadie still occasionally stole socks. Nancy still called every Sunday. Adam still had roads ahead whose endings he could not see. And on Helen's crossword, one square remained empty. Not because there was no answer, because for once, the answer could wait. Maybe the miracle in this story was never the money that came back. Maybe it was the moment Helen finally understood that one mistake did not erase a lifetime of wisdom, dignity, and love. We often judge ourselves more harshly than God ever asks us to. We believe we must fix everything before we deserve forgiveness, or hide our weakness before someone decides we are no longer worthy of trust. But sometimes grace arrives through something much smaller. A daughter who learns to listen, a stranger who chooses not to take control, or even a frightened little dog whose cry reminds us that asking for help is not the same as surrendering our independence. Faith does not promise that every loss will be restored exactly as it was. Sometimes God's mercy is found in giving us enough courage to keep living with the empty spaces. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who may need that reminder today. Tell us in the comments what lessons stayed with you, and subscribe for more stories of hope, compassion, and second chances. May God bless you, protect your family, and give you peace for every unanswered question still ahead.